Hi there. This week we are focusing on social media and audience engagement. And social media has changed, obviously, the way companies and organizations can interact with their customers. Social media really interacts with them at the masses, where social media, I think, allows you to engage one-on-one with your customers. And another industry that's obviously benefited from this is professional sports teams, such as in the NFL. Think about the way the players are using social media even before, during, and after games, things like Twitter and Instagram. You probably don't know this, but it's estimated about 30 million users interact with the NFL some way, somehow on Twitter. In 2009, the NFL actually implemented a policy that said that players could not use any social media 90 minutes before the kickoff and during the game. But in 2012, they lifted this ban in the Pro Bowl. They actually set up a computer right there on the field that allowed the athletes to use social media. And joining me now today is Annalee Schmittel. She is a University of Florida PhD student who is actually studying and researching social media in sports communication and player development. So Annalee, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to talk to you about this. You know how much I love this topic, so I'm thrilled to be talking to you guys.
So some of you maybe throughout the semester have wondered, how does a girl from Winona, Minnesota end up teaching at the University of Florida? And well, we have Annalee to blame for that one, or thank for that one, depends on how you look at this. So Annalee was one of my former students in her undergraduate degree in mass communication. Then she pursued her master's here at Winona State in education leadership before moving on to the University of Florida. And I don't know, Annalee, what, a year or so ago, the department chair asked if you knew anyone that could teach Intro to Social Media Online, and that's kind of how this all started.
Yes, it did, and it's exciting. I was so happy to have you as a Gator, like a former Warrior, and now we're Gators together, so very excited.
It's normally I'm the one giving the references, and in this case, the shoe was on the other foot, and Annalee was my reference, and I'm just so grateful because I've really enjoyed this class. And this topic is obviously near and dear to my heart as well. When you're talking about social media and engagement, and more specifically, when we're talking about it with, fans of athletes and teams, how has social media changed what our teams and our athletes are doing?
Boy, I think it's been huge. I mean, if you are a sports fan, and it doesn't matter what sport or what athlete or what team, if you've been sort of following that team for the last 5 years or so, the improvements in terms of fan engagements are just incredible. When you think back to, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, the only way you would interact with that team or with an athlete was either you go to the game, obviously, or you go to maybe an autograph signing where you could meet that player. But that would be 2 seconds of your life, and you really wouldn't get much out of it other than maybe the autograph. Or, of course, the game experience. But what has happened since sort of this evolution of social media platforms, and Twitter specifically, is there's so much more access to players, to the teams, more information, more background about their life. So when you think back, there used to be a time where you would only get information from journalists, right? Sports reporters or sports journalists. And they would cover the team obviously on game day and maybe a little preview beforehand. But then you really would have to wait for the game, and that would be the end of it. Now that has changed. We are now having like what we researchers call a circum-social relationship. So it's somewhat social, but not obviously as social as a face-to-face interaction on a daily basis. And so that has definitely changed the amount of access we have to the athletes, the amount of access we have to information, how close we get to them it's incredible, really.
So when we talk about that one-on-one interaction, do you see that as a strength and maybe also a weakness?
Yeah, it's sort of a double-edged sword, I would definitely say. If you look at brand loyalty, that's a big thing we always talk about, is brand loyalty and sort of image. You want the athletes to sort of stand out, right? You want the fans to really have some sort of connection that builds that athlete's brand loyalty or that team's brand loyalty. Because the more interaction we have with them, the more likely we are to really identify with them and have that inform that relationship and form that fan loyalty. And that's what people want. That's what teams want. That's what the athletes want. That's what marketers want. Everybody wants that. So it's really interesting to see that sort of shift now with social media, because these athletes are letting us into their lives more or less. And so there is an increase in our interaction and in our relationship and our strength of relationship. But at the same time, because we do get athletes that are telling us more about their personality off the field, there's certainly a number of incidents I can think of on top of my head just recently that can kind of interrupt that fan relationship. I might think of athlete Y in a positive way, but when I hear him voice his opinion on a topic, and it's different from my own, that causes a bit of an interruption, if you want to call it that.
So it's almost like those naughty players, you know. Before, when they did things wrong, we eventually probably heard about it through our traditional avenues and the newscasts. But now it seems like that is just instant, that if there's an issues management or a crisis situation, there's a lot more transparency when it comes to social media. You know, how does that work when you're talking about engagement, when you do want to be in this positive light as a player, but then all of a sudden it kind of goes the wrong way?
Well, we see it all the time. You know, we saw it not even just on social media, but if you think of probably the biggest recent incident was probably Richard Sherman last season when he did that interview with Erin Andrews, and everybody's like, oh my God, he's a thug, like what is wrong with him? How dare he talk like that? And so it's always been this idea of we have our athlete in our mind and they have to be a certain way, and the minute they sort of show us who they really are, we might not agree with that. We always want them. We always want more. We always want to know who they really are, but when we get it, we might not actually want what we're getting and what we're asking for. So with social media, we also see this. I think back to the Trayvon Martin case or even the recent Ferguson incidents. There are a lot of athletes that voiced their opinions, and there was a lot of backlash. And those are some of the more extreme sort of social issue topics. But even if you look at some teams occasionally really get in trouble. The Red Sox recently tweeted something on a Monday where there was the shooting at Florida State, actually. And it was like, so how is your Monday going? And everybody else was just kind of like, what the heck? Like, how are you saying this right now? There's been such an incident, and you are talking about something completely different. So there's incidents. They're not always, planned. Obviously, they're not always intentional. Sometimes the posts we have are scheduled. So they happen, but they happen more frequently now, obviously. And they get coverage and people react right away. So as I said earlier, it's a double-edged sword because we have this fan engagement and we want to continuously interact with our fans, but every now and then it might not go as we plan.
So now that athletes and teams have, followers on Twitter, folks have liked their fan page, some of them are even diving into Instagram. So we've got them connected, we've got this one-on-one interaction. What examples are either athletes or teams using that you've seen that really are audience engagement? In this week we're talking about things like contests or trivia or user-generated materials being posted. So how are athletes taking that? And do you have some specific examples you can share with us?
Yeah, I think we see teams especially, they try obviously to get their fans really engaged throughout the week. So it's not just on game day when they are by nature engaged with the team, but it's throughout the entire week. There are a few NFL teams especially that I know they're doing a fantastic job with social media. One of my favorites is probably the Seattle Seahawks. They're doing an incredible job with their social media platforms, especially on Twitter and Instagram, and they have Snapchat and all of it. And they're doing some really cool stuff. Their big thing is the 12th man. So they always try to get their fans engaged. So they will say, tweet us your best picture where you're wearing your jersey, and then they will retweet them. So the fans are like, oh my God, I got retweeted by the Seattle Seahawks account. So in a lot of ways, people don't really want an autograph, or they don't want memorabilia of sorts. What they want is that acknowledgement on social media, whether that is a favorite, a retweet, a selfie with their favorite athlete. That's much more important now than an autograph, for example. So they are doing some really cool stuff in terms of fan engagement. The Bucks in Milwaukee actually are really good at some of them, and I really suggest that all the students that you have look at some of the sports teams. NASCAR, they do really neat things. They're really good at their social media behavior. And in sports specifically, I know this is true for all companies, but in sports you see it so much more because the role that fans really play in the whole situation.
So it's interesting. You had talked about, maybe 5, 10 years ago, we were still running after the athletes for autographs, and we still held them to this high standard. Now, all of a sudden, we're super pumped and excited when I'm retweeted by, an athlete. Yesterday, you and I chatted a little bit about a particular social media engagement, and I think it was a race car driver. Can you walk us through how that sort of started and what that engagement idea was all about?
Yeah, so I was telling you about Jimmie Johnson, who is a NASCAR driver, and a very good one, obviously, very good on the track. But they are doing some of the most incredible social media work that I have ever seen from any athlete or any sports team or really any organization. So the girl in charge there actually is Lauren Murray. She's their social media content manager, and she is incredible. Like, she comes up with the greatest ideas. And so one of them, which is my favorite that they'd ever done, was they were on their way to Las Vegas for an event for NASCAR. And on the plane, before they were taking off, Jimmie had tweeted, I'm headed to Vegas. Hopefully I will have all my teeth when I come back. And that was sort of a soft reference to the movie The Hangover that obviously took place in Las Vegas and where things get kind of out of control. So it was just kind of a subtle tweet, just something funny showing his personality. Nothing really extraordinary about that tweet other than it being funny. But it got a lot of reaction. There are so many mentions of Jimmie Johnson just going to Las Vegas. So Jimmie and his social media manager had a talk, and they're like, oh, let's do something funny. How funny would it be if we recreated parts of the movie? And so they had sort of played around with some ideas if they're going to do video or photo, and they decided on photo and that they were going to use, instead of YouTube uploading a video, they were going to use Instagram. And so the entire week that they were there, they would be releasing pictures of scenes from the movie. So it would be Jimmie Johnson with a tiger passed out in his hotel room. It would be Jimmie Johnson with a fake chicken in his hotel room. Him in an elevator with his friends and a baby strapped to him. Those pictures are incredibly funny, and it was so clever because they got so much engagement. It went completely viral. Good Morning America covered it. It was everywhere. I mean, there's so many likes. He got so many followers afterwards. It was just really cool, and they were very strategic about what they did. They didn't just release all the photos at once, and they didn't say how many they were going to release. So people always were checking, is there going to be another one? When is it going to be? So it was really cool, probably one of the best ideas in social media that I've ever seen.
It's interesting that you talked about, these photos, and as someone who would be following him, I'd be like, I wonder what scene is next, or can I vote on a scene? And, it really allows that engagement, and that's what this lecture really has been about this week. Now, in a week or so, the students are going to be moving to content strategy. So obviously having this great idea like the race car driver is one thing, but having a solid strategy behind it is also important. Can you just give us maybe one tip as we finish out our Google Hangout here on content strategy, or even just how important it is to have a solid foundation when it comes to that before you just start to, tweet away?
Yeah, I mean, we all know this. We do things on Twitter especially. It's in our pocket. It's really quick. You're very quick to just tweet something. But I think when you're trying to be more strategic and really understand how to use the platform to your fullest advantage, that's when things are the best. It's not mindless tweeting. That's not what fans want to see. What fans want to see is personality. They want to see more than just words. I just talked with someone with the Seahawks the other week for a class of mine, and he said when we include pictures, get twice the action as otherwise. So there's just these little things that you can do to improve your interaction with your customers or your fans or whatever it might be. So to really look and do your research as to what is it the audience wants, like are they good with pictures? Do they want to see video? Do they like contests? How can we incorporate them? Even just, retweeting them or favoriting their tweets can go a really, really long way. So I think with anything, doing your research and really seeing what's out there and not mindlessly using every single platform that is available, that is probably one of the biggest tips that I would have.
Absolutely. I think my students, we've asked them to spend a lot of time on researching the target market. And then we talk about don't just pick Facebook because you know it. I mean, pick Facebook because that's what your audience is, that's what they want, that's what allows you to share the best content. And so obviously, in the NFL and national sporting teams all over are embracing social media and really engaging and giving their fans a very, very different look at what it's like to be a professional athlete.
Yeah, for sure. They're doing a great job. I mean, even if you're not interested in sports, but you're interested in social media, I would look at what the sports teams are doing because they are setting the standard incredibly high for every other industry.
Well, I think as someone who is studying this, at the University of Florida, and obviously my students watching this are also studying, we watch with a very different eye. Like you said, I might not be the biggest football fan, but when I watch, I'm watching what they're doing with social media and how can I transfer that same idea over to something maybe at the Red Cross. And again, building that interaction, building that engagement. Our audience expects more out of us on social media than they probably ever have in recent years. And it's important to have a great idea and a strategy to deliver that.
Absolutely, 100% agree. And there's so much you can transfer. Loyalty, brand loyalty is something that's not just important in sports, but in every industry. So using those tips and tricks that you might see that a sports team uses or an athlete uses, that's something you can use for your organization, for your CEO, or whatever it might be.
Well, again, I want to thank you for joining us for a Google Hangout here and giving us a little different perspective on social media and audience engagement. This week we did spend a lot of time working with organizations or researching, and so it's really great to see what athletes and what national sporting teams are doing. And Annalie, your expertise and your insight, I think, is going to be really helpful as they move into their next project. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Good luck to all your students.